All right.
Are we there?
We are here. It's official. It's
That's a
official.
great smile. So,
Hey, I
King, how do you
appreciate you.
like
I
to be
appreciate
called? King or Wild?
you. You can call me Tuna. You can call me Tuna.
Okay. So, how did you
That's
come up with
good,
that
man.
name?
Listen. Oh, so it's crazy. So I used to be an artist myself.
Right?
And as an artist, I was the young king. And then I
Right?
started moving into the media, journalism, and PR and marketing. And I didn't want people to, feel like an artist was promoting them or an artist was helping them with their career. So I changed my name, and Wilde comes from Oscar Wilde, the author who
Oh,
wrote the book.
fantastic.
So
Great taste. Excellent
yeah,
taste.
yeah. I
That's a
appreciate
thumbs
that.
up if you can see my thumb.
Right, right. I appreciate that. So yeah, I took the Wilde from his name and basically rewrote my story, and I used a childhood nickname, which is Tuna, and just put them together. It
Right?
all came through clear. All right, cool. So
So,
yeah,
when
so
you were a
that's what.
kid, they called you Tuna?
Yes, yes. So my mom, when
Was
she was
that because
pregnant
your
with
mom
me,
always sent you to school with a tuna fish sandwich?
no, that's the only thing she could eat when she was pregnant with me. Only thing that didn't make her sick, tuna
Astonishing.
fish. Yeah, yeah. So that's
Astonishing.
also a lot of protein.
Right. I eat tuna for breakfast every single morning, a whole can.
Hey man, can't
So
go
I'm
wrong
with
with the
you.
big fish, man.
Right, exactly. And tunas are great hunters. Um,
They are.
they school with dolphins and they corral smaller fish. They get
Right.
them enclosed in a small area, and the fish try to escape by jumping out of the water. And seabirds hang around over the tuna and the dolphins to take
Right.
advantage of the fish that are trying frantically to get away from the tuna.
And that's how I move, man. I'm moving in the ocean, swimming with the big fish, and we just keeping the cycle going.
Where did you grow up?
So I was born in Philadelphia. Then I ended up moving outside the city in Montgomery County. So I went to school, high school in Souderton, PA. Different
Right.
experience, different side of life. But
Was it a
after that,
suburb?
yeah, yeah, it was the suburbs. It was mostly when I moved there, coming out of the city, it was predominantly white school. So it was a whole different culture shock for me to be coming from the
Amazing.
inner city, going to the outside, you know what I'm saying? And then getting at
Right.
both getting both sides of the train tracks is what made me be able to blend and upgrade because I understand both sides of life.
Right. Well, that sounds
Right.
like a terrific way to grow up. So you
Yeah,
have a foot
yeah,
in
I loved it.
you have a foot in at least two cultures.
Right, right. Yeah, I loved it. I wouldn't change it.
Strange thing is, DJ Jazzy Jeff, was and the Fresh Prince, was the band
Right,
that started Will Smith. And the first time
right.
I was working with Russell Simmons, on Run DMC. And the first time I ever heard that band, I wanted to work with them. And they were out of
Right,
Philadelphia. And I suspect that Will
right.
Smith had the same sort of experience that you did, because he obviously had a mastery of at least two different cultures. And you could hear it in
Right,
his voice. You could hear it in his enunciation. I wanted to
right.
work with them so badly, but Russell believed that if I was working with Run DMC, he wanted another publicist working on DJ Jazzy Jeff and the Fresh Prince to give me competition, to keep me
Oh
on my
yeah.
toes.
Hey. Well, that
But
made
I
you
was
better
not
then. That
happy
made,
about that.
oh yeah,
Yes,
like
I'm sure it did.
but it's definitely that's amazing, man. So yeah, enough about me. Let's dive back into you. Let's talk about you. You here for a Wild Tuna exclusive, and we want to highlight and let everybody know all the amazing things you did. The list of things you've accomplished. I want to do at least half of it. You know what I'm saying? So let's
Right.
talk about that. Let's take it all the way back. Let's take it back to where you're from and how you grew up.
Well, okay, let me give you what I am currently, and then we'll go back to how I got started. So
Okay.
I have this really, really weird background. Um, I've been in science since I was 10 years old.
Hmm.
I've published or given scholarly lectures at scholarly conferences on 12 different scientific fields, from
Hmm.
quantum physics and cosmology to biopolitics, economics, governance, the whole deal,
Right.
biosystems. And but I went on a little field expedition in the 1970s, and I went into a field I knew absolutely nothing about. I went into rock and roll, and I founded the biggest PR firm in the music business. And because I could see things from a scientific perspective instead of the traditional perspectives, it became the biggest PR firm in the music industry. And I worked with Michael Jackson, Prince, Bob Marley, Bette Midler, AC/DC, Aerosmith, Kiss, Queen, Run DMC, Billy Joel, Billy Idol, Paul Simon, Gabriel, Chaka Khan, ZZ Top, Joan Jett, people like that. And
so
often building their careers.
Everybody we love. That's what you did. You work with everybody we love today.
TUNA, I tried my best because I didn't take a traditional approach to PR. So not at all. I lectured my clients and said, look, if you want me to fashion an artificial mask, an image, which was popular at the time, then I'm not the person for you. I'll get you a meeting within 2 hours with my best competitor. If you're going to work with me, you have to understand that music is not about an exchange of pieces of plastic. In those days, everything was vinyl records. It's not about an exchange of money. It's not about an exchange of downloads. It's about an exchange of fucking goddamn human soul. And unless you are willing to go with that approach, then I can't work with you. So my job was to give you icons, was to give you people you could believe in, was to give you people whose posters you could hang on your wall when you were 12 years old and you could grow up with, and who would continue to represent part of the meaning of your life for the rest of your life. That was my, if you'll excuse my language, that was my fucking goddamn mission, period. So back to the question, which is how I got into this. So I grew up in Buffalo, New York. It was a steel town. And nobody in Buffalo, New York liked me at all. The kids didn't want to have anything to do with me. They kept me as far away as possible, or they bullied me. You know, I was useful as a target. They chased me around the block. And my parents didn't have any interest in me for God knows what reason. I never found out why. And at 10 years old, I was sitting in my family's big living room, and a book opened in my lap, which was a bit strange, because you know how you know the location of every book your parents own? Because they always stay in exactly the same places on the shelves. So this was a book I'd never seen before. And it was a book I don't remember seeing after that. And it said, the first two laws of science are these. The truth at any price, including the price of your life, rule number one. And it gave the example of Galileo, and it told the story all wrong. It said Galileo would have been willing to go to the stake to defend his truth. And that struck home with me, well, being willing to live and die for your truth. Principle of science number two. Second rule of science. Look at things right under your nose as if you've never seen them before, and then proceed from there. Look for things that are invisible to you, that you and everybody around you take for granted and really do not see, and bring them into visibility, and then proceed from there. And the example was a guy named Anton von Leeuwenhoek, who invented the microscope and took simple pond water and looked at it through his lenses and discovered that we'd been sharing the world without knowing it with an entire universe of microscopic creatures. He called them animalcules. We're up against some of them today with COVID and the coronavirus. And that's what really got me started. And then when I was 12 years old, I had a weird experience. I realized I was an atheist. And, you know, I had these two principles to live by. Who needed anything else? Who needed a God? And I put off admitting this to myself because I had a major event coming up, the first party I'd ever be invited to in Buffalo, New York, my bar mitzvah, and there were going to be presents. And if I confessed to myself that I did not believe in God, the bar mitzvah was over, canceled, out. So we had the bar mitzvah in June. It was a big deal. I spent 2 months writing thank you notes all the way until the end of August. And once I was finished writing the thank you notes for this enormous boodle of presents, then I could finally confess that I was an atheist. Now, a strange thing happens just after the end of August on the Jewish calendar. The high holidays, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, the most important holidays of the year. Now, my parents were not observant. and they never went to the temple unless a friend's son was having a bar mitzvah or something like that. But when it came to these holidays, they were passionately committed to them. So they got me into a suit. I do not know how. I have hated suits all my life. They got me into their blue Fraser four-door automobile in the back seat. They drove me all the way to Richmond Avenue where the synagogue was, and then I refused to go any further. And I was hanging on to this sturdy American-made door frame with all my might, and my parents were dragging at my ankles, pulling my socks and shoes off, trying to drag me up the street like a sack of meat, and I had a sudden realization. Galileo made his discoveries by taking an instrument with two lenses and a tube, and which had been designed for looking at the horizon to see if enemy troops were coming, and he turned it in an unexpected direction, up at the sky. Everybody knew what was up in the sky. It was God's territory. That was God's underwear. That was God's living room rug, the bottom of God's living room rug. Everything up there was perfect. And Aristotle had said the perfect form was the circle, the sphere. So everything was obviously spheres and circles. And he turned his telescope up, that's what we call it now, and he saw that up there in the sky there were these rocky balls that looked pretty much like rocks on Earth. And he changed our relationship to the universe. And Anton von Leeuwenhoek was a draper. He imported fabrics to Amsterdam. So he took his lens, which was designed for horizontal viewing, for looking at fabrics to see how fine the weave was. And he turned it in an unexpected direction, down, and looked at pond water and human sperm, but that's another subject for another time. And I mean, it was fresh, so this guy had balls. Well, I didn't mean to put it that way. Nonetheless, the fact is that all of a sudden I saw, if there are no gods in the heaven, and there are no gods under the earth, I'm an atheist, so there are no gods up there or down there, right? But there are gods in this scene with my parents willing to drag their firstborn son up the street like a bag of hamburger. And the gods are in the passions within my parents, their absolute determination. And if those gods are alive in them, then those gods are alive in me. And despite the fact that I had my start in theoretical physics and microbiology, and I had accumulated my first scientific credentials when I was 12 years old, I mean, I had co-designed a computer that won some science fair awards. I built my first and only Boolean algebra machine. I had a meeting with the head of the graduate physics department at the University of Buffalo, and instead of 5 minutes, he gave me an hour because we were discussing Big Bang versus steady state theory of the universe and the interpretation of the Doppler shift. And he came out of his office and he put his hand on my shoulder and he said to my mom, "You don't have to save for grad school for him. He'll get into any grad school he wants in theoretical physics." So that was my background. But in addition to that and many other sciences that I'd picked up by the time I was 12 years old, I had a mission. And the mission was to find the gods inside of us. It was to find the ecstatic experience. I could see that in my synagogue, it was set up like a Lutheran church. It had wooden benches, wooden pews, and you had to go sideways across other people's knees in order to get into a spot. And in front of you was a wooden shelf with lots of books that nobody ever touched. And you stood, you were imprisoned, you were trapped between other people. And you stood up when the rabbi said you should stand up, and you sat down when the rabbi said you should sit down, and that was it. But I could see that there was a different approach to the gods inside of us. It was the ecstatic experience. And then at the age of 14, so I was already on the track of the ecstatic experience when I was 13 years old. And then two things came across my path. One was a book by William James called The Varieties of the Religious Experience. And he portrays these ecstatic experiences in people like George Fox, who saw blood raining from the skies and running down the streets of Lichfield, England, and St. Teresa, who lay in her stone-hard, cold cell in the dark at night trying to sleep, and she felt an angel coming through the walls and piercing her entrails with a spear, and she felt the infinite bliss of God within her and felt she was taken to the height of the skies and shown the panoramic view of the earth while filled with the love of God that it was impossible to express. And what what William James was trying to say is these people are having experiences that we could call psychopathological, mentally ill. But in the
Right.
hands of the right people, mental illness can be an engine of history. And the second,
Right.
two other people came across my path. One was James Baldwin with his book, Go Tell It on the Mountain. And there are 2 pages in Go Tell It on the Mountain where he shows you, he puts you inside the experience of shouting. He puts you inside the experience of feeling that God has possessed you and you are foaming at the mouth, you are writhing on the floor and filled with the Spirit of God for 2 hours. And a movie came along called Black Orpheus, based on another black religion. It's called Macumba, South America. And it's similar. You have a lot of drumming going on until you finally are seized by a god and sent writhing on the floor. Well, I wanted to know that experience, to personally experience it, and at the same time to use all of my scientific tools to come to understand it.
Right.
So that helps explain why I was in rock and roll. So when I graduated from NYU, I mean, first of all, I dropped out to seek Zen Buddhist Satori, and a movement grew up around me, and later the movement got a name, the hippie movement. That's all in my book, How I Accidentally Started the 60s. The rest of this is in my book, Einstein, Michael Jackson, and Me, A Search for Soul in the Power Pits of Rock and Roll, which has been named the best book of 2020 by the New York Weekly Times and the LA Weekly Times. But at any rate, so we'll fast forward. So I'm graduating from NYU after dropping out of school, hitchhiking, riding the rails, and having tons of adventures. And I have, just like the head of the graduate physics department predicted, I've got 4 graduate school fellowships. But they're in something that doesn't have a name yet. It's called neuroscience. And I graduate from school, magna cum laude, Phi Beta Kappa, supposed to go off to Columbia University in September, and I have a sudden realization that college is going to be, or graduate school is going to be Auschwitz for the mind. I'm after the gods inside of us. How many of those ecstatic experiences am I going to have in grad school and beyond in an academic career? 0. I'm going to be giving paper and pencil tests to 22 college students in exchange for a psychology credit. How many of those people light like a match and just go off with the ecstatic experience in that room? 0. And plus something that happened to me in my junior year of college, I was taking a lot of poetry courses because poetry had seized my soul when I was 15 and 16 years old and changed me. And to me, it was writing poetry was extremely important. And one day, the poet in residence at NYU said, Bloom, wait until everybody leaves this room. Then close the door. Then sit down here. And he pointed at the seat opposite his desk. And Tuna, this did not look good. Just did not sound healthy. So I sat down in the seat, and he said, look, you, last year I asked you to be on the staff of the literary magazine. You never even showed up. This year I'm telling you, you are the literary magazine. You are the editor of the literary magazine. You don't even have a faculty advisor. The minute you walk out that door, you're it. Now walk out that door. And I walked out of the door looking extremely confused because I hated literary magazines. You know, they have these pale eggshell blue covers that will put you to sleep, even on a night when you're suffering total insomnia. They have choices of typeface that are garbage. They're just terrible. And they're so awful that if you found a room filled with a rip-roaring orgy and you tossed a literary magazine into the room, you could empty that room in 10 minutes.
I don't know. I might ignore it. I might not see it.
Well, you'd have to have strength. So at any rate, I walked out the door looking extremely disturbed. And somebody walked up to me, a student I didn't know, and said, you look upset about something. Can I help you? And I said, yes. I've just been named the editor of the literary magazine. And he said, look, why don't you go for a cup of coffee with me? Now, Tuna, I had not grown up among other human beings. My bedroom had laboratory rats, guinea pigs, and guppies. And guinea pigs and guppies do not have simple human rituals like a cup of coffee. So I really didn't know what he was talking about, but I meekly followed him like an anthropologist to observe this strange ritual of humankind. And we went to a coffee shop. I ordered a glass of water. He ordered a cup of coffee. And he asked me one of the most important questions I've ever been asked in my life, which is, if you could do anything you wanted with this literary magazine, what would it be? And I said, a picture book. And he said, okay, fine, you got your answer. So I turned it into an experimental graphics and literary magazine. And we won 2 National Academy of Poets prizes, and we caused a huge stir. We were 12 by 12. The magazine had been called the Washington Square Review. So we kept the name. But we turned the format into a big 12 by 12 inch square in blazing full color. It was magnificent. And the excitement on campus was so enormous that I was called into a meeting with the Student Activities Committee. I didn't know there was such a thing as a Student Activities Committee. So I went, and I didn't know what they did. So I went to the meeting, and they said, look, your magazine was fantastic, doubling your budget for the 2nd issue. Have you ever heard of a budget being doubled for anything? Ever?
No.
In your life? Well, it happened to me a number of times. But at any rate, so when and the 2nd issue, nobody would talk to me. Half of my literary staff quit when they saw the direction I was taking. It was going to be the sex and death issue. It was going to be controversial. And on the 2nd issue, once it came out, nobody would talk to me on the campus, not even the poet in residence. But I got phone calls from the art directors of Look magazine, which was this great big glossy full color biweekly magazine, gorgeous. Evergreen Review, which was the leading bohemian magazine in the world, and Boy's Life, which goes out to Boy Scouts everywhere. It's another big full color glossy magazine. We had made a splash in the art directorial community. So I got out of school. I felt I had no purpose in life anymore. I did a half-hearted attempt to commit suicide. My wife had me thrown into a mental institution. It was an eye-opening experience. They let me out after 2 weeks for good behavior. It was really an entertaining educational experience. And then I went over to visit the lead artist of the crew that I had assembled for the magazine. And he was brilliant, absolutely brilliant. So I walked into his apartment near 10th Street on 2nd Avenue, and there was a wall-to-wall carpet, no furniture. He, his wife, and his 3-year-old were sitting on the floor. They were all crying, and I asked them what the matter was. And they said, our furniture has been repossessed. Our electricity's being turned off, our telephone's being turned off, and we're being thrown out of this apartment. And I said, what? Wow. Your work is absolutely brilliant. If anybody sees it, they're going to give you a job, enough of a job to pay your rent. So why don't you put your work in a portfolio? I haven't decided yet what I'm doing for the summer. And I'll take your work out for 2 weeks, and I'll get you work. And he said, well, actually, my best friend and I came here from Boston after art school to start an art studio. So you have to take my work and the work of my best friend. His best friend's work was vomititious. It was ghastly, but I wanted to get his rent. So I said, okay. And his best friend's wife threw her work into the portfolio, and she actually was a really good designer. And I went out to get him work. And by the end of the summer, I had New York Magazine interested in doing a feature story on the studio, but I hadn't gotten a stitch of work. And here I am realizing that grad school is going to be Auschwitz for the mind. But the art studio position is a permission slip to go into every major advertising agency, to go into every major magazine, to go into every major publishing company, to try to sell the art. In other words, it's a periscope position for the land where the gods are in contemporary culture. And plus, my wife, I had married her between my freshman year and sophomore year in college. And my wife had had a previous husband who'd been at Dartmouth. And my wife had made one of those statements that a wife makes when she wants deniability, those little statements she can later say she never made. which is I'm tired of having student husbands, and I didn't want to lose my wife. So put all those things together, and I called Columbia University, and I said, I'm not going to be able to make it this year. I'll make it next year. Well, the art studio, I never went back to grad school. The art, I made it on the cover of Art Direction magazine. The art studio was the leading avant-garde commercial art studio on the East Coast. I invented a new animation technique for NBC TV. We did, most important, we did stuff for most of the major magazines and every major publisher. We did book covers and things like that. But the most important thing that we did was ABC owned 7 FM stations. And they made a really bold decision. There was a new format that had been concocted of all places at Bard College, which is like the most avant-garde college you can possibly imagine. And it was a bunch of scruffy, unwashed hippies. And they'd come up with this idea of a new radio format they called progressive radio. And progressive radio, instead of top 40, where you can only play the top 40 songs on the charts, in progressive radio, the DJ could play anything he damn well pleased. He could even play an entire album from beginning to end if he wanted to. And ABC was going to gamble its radio stations worth hundreds of millions of dollars on this new format. And they hired my art studio to do the art. And then they asked me to form an ad. They liked the art so much, they asked me to form an advertising agency to handle all of their advertising. And I didn't want to learn time buying. It's boring. So I didn't do that for them. But meanwhile, the promotion director kept trying to school me on rock and roll. She kept trying to give me albums. She taught me some of the background of the performers. And then one day, she said, look, we're having a live concert in Studio B. If I gave you 2 tickets, would you come? So I said I would. I took the 2 tickets. I took the artist that I had tried to save from starvation, who'd been sitting on the floor crying with his wife and baby, with me, the one who was absolutely brilliant. And there was a piano player who came to the stage. And the minute he took to the stage, my artist got to his feet and started whistling and whooping and hollering, and he embarrassed the crap out of me. You know, everybody's going to see that he's with me. It was extremely embarrassing. So then the concert ended. The piano player's name was Elton John.
Okay.
And,
so he kind of had a little
and the album, right, and the album was, well, the album was a live album that you still hear on the radio or streaming services today. It was a terrific album, and it took me years and years and years to realize. When I go on stage, I'm looking for the most excited person in the room, and I'm playing to that person, hoping to spread his excitement or her excitement around to the other people in the audience. Peter Bramley was that spark. He was that person Elton John could play off of. And my artist, who would embarrass the hell out of me, was helping make Elton John's concert an absolute classic, just ripping and roaring with laser beam energy. So then there was a guy named Matty Simmons. And Matty Simmons had helped invent something new for American Express. And the something new was called the credit card. And so Matty made a lot of money. And with his lot of money, he wanted to be a publisher. And Matty took me on as if I were his adopted son. He was just amazing to me. And then he had an idea. There was this magazine that came out of Harvard. And it went on newsstands all over North America once a year. And it sold out in 2 hours. So we went up to the guys who put out the magazine that year. And he said, look, come to New York. I'll give you apartments that will make your friends envy you beyond belief. I'll give you salaries that will make your friends' eyeballs drop out. All you have to do is produce that magazine on a monthly basis instead of a yearly basis. And the magazine was called The Lampoon. And the magazine that Matty had in mind was the National Lampoon, which, you know, became iconic in humor circles. And he wanted my art studio to art direct it. Now, remember the artist whose work was so bad that it could induce vomiting?
Right.
And whose work I had carried around only as a favor? Well,
Right.
he went to the other artists in the studio and said, look, now we're going to have this great fat check rolling every single month. Why do we have to split it with Howard? If we throw him out of the studio, then we can take the money for ourselves. So half the artists threw me out of the studio, and the other half of the artists came with me.
Right.
And because that artist was what the artist was really after was he wanted to art direct the National Lampoon, and he knew that with me around, he would never be able to do it. I had a responsibility to Matty Simmons to give him the art direction of his dreams, and it wasn't going to happen with this guy. So he took over the National Lampoon, trashed it for 7 issues, and then lost the gig. And the result was that the artist who was weeping on the floor with his wife died of alcoholism. He had a brief period of being on the national stage when I was handling him, and then he disappeared and started doing art for the walls of delicatessens in exchange for food.
Man.
So, right, but it's unfortunate he didn't see that coming. But meantime, when I was 12, I had this weird experience. I was in 8th grade. And one day, a girl turned her face in my direction, and that had never happened before. And then she made eye contact, and that was an utter shock. That had never happened before. And she said, I told my mom, you understand the theory of relativity. And in those days, the word on the theory of relativity was that only 7 men in the world could understand it, and I didn't understand it. But I didn't want to confess that to her because the only thing I had going for me was that the other kids called me the sickly scientist. They knew I was into science. So as soon as school got out, I jumped on my bicycle. I pedaled as fast as I could to the local library where the librarians literally knew me better than my mother did and said, give me everything you got on relativity. And they rummaged through the stacks and they gave me 2 books, a great big fat book and a little tiny skinny book. The great big fat book was by Einstein and 2 collaborators, and the little skinny book was by Albert Einstein, all on his own. And I had learned, I pedaled back home and started reading. And I had learned at that point, always do the hardest thing first. If you make it to the end of a book, you don't think you understand it all. By the time you finish it, you will have understood something. So I tried to get through the great big fat book, which was 7 words of English on a page, and all the rest was mathematical equations. And TUNA, I've never understood mathematical equations in my life. And got to page 50 at 8 o'clock at night and had a sudden realization. My mom's going to put me to sleep at 10 o'clock. If I don't understand the theory of relativity by then, I'm screwed tomorrow morning when I show up at school. So I turned to the reluctantly, I turned to the little skinny book. And in his introduction to the little skinny book, Einstein, it felt like he had reached out through the page and grabbed me by my shirt and put his nose up to mine and said, schmuck, listen up. To be a genius, it's not enough to come up with a theory that only 7 men in the world can understand. To be a genius, you have to be able to come up with that theory and then explain it so clearly that anyone with a high school education and a reasonable degree of intelligence can understand it. In other words, Albert Einstein, through the pages of a book, had grabbed me and put his nose to mine and said, listen up. To be an original scientific thinker, which is the only thing you're fitted for in life, you are going to have to be a writer. And not just any writer, a really, really good writer, a delicious writer. So while I was putting Cloud Studio on the map, I was looking for ways to get into magazines because I felt that magazines imposed on you the kind of standards that Albert Einstein was demanding from me. Real, clear, lucid, absolutely delicious writing. And meanwhile, there was a designer, a clothing designer, 3 blocks away from our studio, which was on 2nd Avenue and 4th Street in the heart of the East Village. And I liked her clothes, so I started buying them, and then I started co-designing clothes with her. So one day I walked into a grim industrial building in the garment district on my way to an appointment with a new underground fashion magazine called Rags. It was being bankrolled by a guy named Byrne who had bankrolled Rolling Stone. So when I got out of the freight elevator, because this was an industrial building, every elevator was a freight elevator, I expected, there were 3 women in the room, and I expected to lay my portfolio on the table and see them ooh and ah over the work. And I never got that far. As soon as I walked out of that elevator door, their jaws dropped. And they pointed at my clothes. And they said, do you have more of these? And I said, yes, I've got an entire closet full of them. Why? They said, do you think you could write an article about them? Aha! My chance to do an Albert Einstein, to write for a magazine.
Right.
So I said yes, and when I got home that night, I wrote them an article, and I turned it in, and they liked it, and they made me a contributing editor, and I wrote 175 pieces for them. Meanwhile, this is while I was going to the art studio, so this meant every morning I got up at 6 o'clock. I got naked out of the bed, went directly to a Remington manual typewriter from the 1940s, whose keys you had to hit with a sledgehammer. And I sledgehammered at that keyboard until from 6 to 8 in the morning. Then I put clothes on, you know, my fancy Susan Harris co-designed clothes, and went to the art studio and did my art studio thing, and then came home, and from 8 o'clock at night until 11, wrote stories. And it was getting a little tiring. So, and another contributing editor to Rags Magazine had started another magazine called Natural Lifestyles, and she'd made me a contributing editor too.
Right.
So one day I was covering a parapsychology conference. You know, parapsychology, people who read your mind, people who see around corners, people who bend spoons with their mind, all of that stuff. I didn't believe in any of it, but since I was a science person, I figured they'd get me covering a pseudoscience. And I had a pad in my hand, which I had at all times, because, Tuna, I have no memory whatsoever, none. And if I don't write every glowing, gorgeous detail down, I will forget it. So I was scribbling away, and somebody walked up to me.
Not to interrupt you, but they say when you're a genius, your memory, you have so much going on, you have to write it down. So that's just science.
Well, that's interesting. So there I am, scribbling notes like crazy, and a kid walks up to me and says, would you like to edit a magazine? What? Out of thin air? Of course I would. Because if I edited a magazine, I wouldn't have to get up at 6 in the morning, and I wouldn't have to write until 11 o'clock at night. I could do my writing during the day and get paid for it.
Right.
So I said yes, but I had no idea of what the magazine was. Because in those days, I mean, he gave me the name of a person I had to meet, the time I had to meet him, and the address. And we didn't have Google in those days. So you couldn't just take the name and Google it. So I had no idea of who this guy was or what his magazine was. And I went to the meeting. It was at 1 Yuan Plaza, which is one of the fanciest locations in New York City. It's on the grounds of the UN. And Johnny Carson, the talk show host, was famous for living there. And I went up to this absolutely gorgeous office. And to my right was a converted broom closet. And 2 guys in the converted broom closet were busy packing their things and leaving. And on the other side was an office with 7 windows that looked 2 miles up the river and 2 miles down the river. You could watch a boat travel for 4 miles from that office with its 7 astonishing windows. And I walked into the office, and the publisher, Jerry Rothberg, told me the magazine was called Circus. And I thought, okay, well, I've written for the Boy Scouts of America when I was between my freshman and sophomore year of college. And I was thrown out of the Boy Scouts at the age of 11 for incompetence at Morse code. So if you love your audience and you have enough research material, you can write on absolutely anything. And if this is a magazine about clowns and circuses, which I've never been terribly fond of, and I love the audience, I can do it. And he said, no, you don't understand. It's called Circus, but it's about rock and roll. And that's how I got involved in rock and roll. And then I made a discovery. Now I'm a magazine editor, right? Except I'm replacing 2 people. Just one of me is replacing 2 people, which I'm sort of used to. And I get invited to a Fleetwood Mac concert. Now, this is before Stevie Nicks and Lindsey Buckingham joined the group. So Fleetwood Mac was a dying blues band. There were 2 bands that were dying in those days that were considered co-equal. One was Chicken Shack, and the other one was Fleetwood Mac. and Fleetwood Mac was playing Carnegie Hall. So I went to Carnegie Hall to see Fleetwood Mac, and I found Where the Gods Are. There was an audience of 3,000 people. The lights went down. You know the concert experience. You walk in, you're very aware of wanting to look cool to everybody around you. You sit in a seat, you're very aware of the people on either side of you, the people behind you, you want to look cool to them. The lights go down, and if the concert works, you lose that self-consciousness. You get caught up totally in what you're seeing and hearing on stage. It is a mystical experience. It is one of those ecstatic experiences. So we were half an hour into this strange mystical experience of a concert, and all the lights suddenly went up on the audience and shut down on the stage. Not just the lights, the sound system. So Mick Fleetwood, who was this really tall string bean of a guy, probably 6'4", 6'5", stepped to the foot of the stage, and he lifted his fist in the air, and he said, "Fuck it. Ladies and gentlemen, we are going to rock and roll." And he carried on the concert anyway. And the stress of losing the magic of that concert, and then having Mick Fleetwood not just bring magic back under the worst of circumstances, but bring it back at a doubled or quadrupled level, that pulled us even higher than we would have been before. And I suddenly realized, I'm in the land where the gods are. A concert is a magic ritual. A concert is the kind of ritual the Macumbo people were having in Black Orpheus, the film I watched, where they induce an ecstatic experience. No, nobody froths at the mouth. Nobody writhes on the floor. But, Lord, this is where the gods are.
That's real,
and
man. That's real.
So that's how I got into rock and roll, and I took it seriously. It became my religion, because it was the land where I could see the religion I'd had since I was 12 years old, the religion of the ecstatic experience coming to life. And what is the ecstatic experience about, Tuna? It's about feeling merged into something bigger than yourself. And I was going to learn all kinds of lessons in the future. And one of the lessons that I'd learn is, you're 12 years old. Your hormones are putting you through a really drastic change. You've never been in this hormonal body that you're now experiencing before. You're confused as hell. Your emotions want to take you out of your family and give you independence from your family. But you have no place in the world. Very few people recognize you. Very few people respect you. And plus, you have all of these emotions that you don't hear expressed by anybody around you. So you are sure they make you insane. And then along comes a Michael Jackson, a Prince, a Bob Marley, somebody who is expressing those inexpressible things within you and telling you, you are not insane, you are a movement. That there are tens of thousands of others, tens of millions of others like you. And they will cluster around this music and demonstrate their power as a collective force and the power of their personal experience. So it took me decades and decades, including many decades after I left rock and roll, to realize exactly what this was all about. But I was in the icon-making business, and I was in the icon-making business not just to keep the souls of the people I worked with aloft, Prince, Michael Jackson, Bob Marley, but to lift your soul. And to give you something worth believing in when you were a kid. So does that make any sense?
Man, I wish I had more time. I have a million questions I want to ask you. I got so many questions I want to ask. But that explains everything. That's everything that we need right now. But we definitely going to have you back on. We're going to have to definitely talk and reconnect, because I have a million questions. Oh, man. But the story was great. I appreciate it. Everything that you said was real. Everyone, we can relate to it. You know what I'm saying? And it's an honor to be able to have you on tonight and be able to pick your brain a little bit. Even just hear your story is inspirational. So I appreciate that.
Well, It's a pleasure. So we'll do it again, and we'll get into some of the
Definitely.
stories on some of these great souls, great
Right.
people whose souls I got to dive into to the nth degree,
Right.
because that was
Right.
my
Listen,
job.
whenever the next time you're free, let me know. I need as much time, as much of your time as I can get.
Terrific. Okay, so have a great night, and it was a pleasure.
Definitely, definitely. Until next time, everyone, Howard Bloom, the legend, the genius, he's here and he'll be around. So make sure y'all follow him, study what he did, understand his path and his message, and really look at, life itself
And
and
take a
take
look at
that
this
and
book.
run with it. Right. Definitely. And one of seven. One of seven.
Right.
So definitely want to tap into your work and your writings. I appreciate you once again. I'm gonna send you everything. We're gonna reconnect. But man, I just appreciate you, man. I don't even know. I was blown away. I'm a fan.
Well, you get me energized. Okay, have a great night.
You too, man. I appreciate you. Yeah, man. That was amazing. Wow. So shout out to Howard Bloom, man. That was amazing. Ouch, man. We gotta have him back on. I got so many questions. There's so many questions I got here that I need to ask him. But we gonna come back. It's a nice hour segment. We gonna bring him back on. We gonna get more. We gonna find out those stories you want to tell us about. So I'll be right back. We got another interview coming up with Soho Johnny. So give us 2 minutes. Tap right back in.